This video is supported by NordPass. Hi and welcome back to the channel. I'm not sure how many of you know about the movies of Samuel Fuller. If you don't know about them, that's cool because you've got a lot of really cool movies to discover. Fuller was a crazy, interesting guy. He started out, he was a newspaper copy boy from the age of 12. By the time he was 17 in New York City, he was a crime reporter. Before the war, he was a screenwriter for a time in Hollywood. He wrote a few crime novels as well, based on his journalistic experience. And then when World War II came along, he became an infantryman. He was offered a cushier job because he had journalistic experience, so they were going to put him in the PR area. But he ended up being an infantryman. And he went through North Africa and Italy and a whole bunch of those other places where people were chewed up and spat out. And he was also there when Falkenau concentration camp was liberated. And then after the war, he started making fairly low-budget movies, which, from our modern viewpoint, were prescient, hard-hitting, really interesting, and they hold up incredibly well in the 21st century. He made classic movies like Pick Up on South Street and Underworld USA and House of Bamboo, which influenced one of the movies I'm going to talk about today. He also made White Dog, which I've talked about on a previous video. Hell of a great filmmaker. His characters were always interesting. The dialogue was kind of quirky, but really on point. He didn't pull any punches as a filmmaker, and he is one of those movie makers where once you've seen a couple of his movies, you will want to see more. There's no two ways about it. You will want to see more Samuel Fuller movies once you've watched a couple of them. By coincidence, I have a couple of them to suggest to you right now. The first one was in my last video, which I talked about the imprint movies that I wanted to talk about on the channel. And this one came up fairly often when I asked people which movies they wanted me to do next. And I'm kind of glad it did because I was going to do it this time anyway. It's from 1957. It's a movie starring Angie, Dickinson, Gene Barry, Lee Van Cleef, and Nat King Cole. And there's a rule of cinema. Any movie where Nat King Cole sings the theme song to it is automatically 20% better.
China Gate, China Gate.
And this one didn't need the boost, but it really is an interesting film, and it's one that I really, really enjoy. China Gate. So the movie is kind of an outlier for 1950s American action cinema for a couple of reasons, one of which is it was cheap as chips to make. Another one is it talked about an obscure conflict in post-war Indochina as it was then. The first Indochina War, which was between France and the communist Viet Minh. It went from 1946 to 1954, and like all such things, it was a brutal and hard conflict, which didn't get a lot of press in the United States. They were focused on the Korean Peninsula at the time. But Sam Fuller decided to make this movie, and it is a team on a mission movie done on a crazy low budget. The team, led by Brock, played by Gene Barry, who's a dynamiter, are to travel through Viet Minh territory to a place called China Gate, which is the main portal through which material is coming from communist China to support the communist Viet Minh. I'm not going to go into the politics much. The movie does an info dump at the start to get rid of that. But Brock comes to the kind of last northern town that isn't under Viet Minh control. It's been bombed to hell. And there he meets his ex-wife, Lucky, played by Angie Dickinson, who's biracial. Angie Dickinson isn't, but the character is. And she has a son who is also Brock's son. Brock's left them for a racist reason. His son has Asian features. Lucky doesn't particularly, but the genes that dominated in her son's genetic code are the Asian ones, so he looks Vietnamese. Brock couldn't handle that, and so he left. He was a Foreign Legion soldier, he still is, but he basically deserted them in this town in Vietnam. But he now needs Lucky's help. She's the person who can get through to the China Gate, because she, along with a bunch of her friends, smuggles cognac from the French South into the North as contraband. And the implication is very strong that she's also a sex worker to make ends meet.
You look wonderful, Lucky. Just wonderful. Now that's the way I like to see you.
and she uses her allure, let's say, to help the team travel to the north and set up the explosives. The China Gate's run by a very ambitious, also biracial officer called Cham, played by Lee Van Cleef. You've got to remember there's a lot of yellowface in 1950 cinema, but this one has a lot less than most. There are a few interesting characters on Brock's team. First off, there's Goldie, played by Nat King Cole, who's also a Foreign Legionnaire. He has a kind of philosophical approach to war, and he acts as a kind of conscience for Brock. While they're not close, they're kind of more workmates than buddies. He's got a certain wisdom about him which holds them in good stead at various times. And he's also tough as anything. At one stage he gets wounded while surrounded by Viet Minh guerrilla fighters. And that toughness shows during those scenes. It is really a nicely paced and nicely shot scene. Another interesting thing, one of the other team members who doesn't get a lot of dialogue but is there mostly because he looks good being there, we get a very young James Hong. Yep, David Lopan himself from Big Trouble in Little China, who only just this very week got himself his Hollywood Walk of Fame star. James Hong's been in movies for at least 65 years, and only now does somebody bother to give him some recognition. But James Hong's in there as well, and his character's kind of not really heavily written, but he's definitely an interesting presence in the ensemble. China Gate does so many things well, apart from Nat King Cole singing the theme song. The battle scenes, which are filmed mostly on a sound stages or in Griffith Park, near the Griffith Park Observatory in Los Angeles, they're really gritty. When there's an explosion, there's an explosion.
I tell you, this is the way to live.
Remember, Fuller was an infantryman. He knows what it's like to be shot at by enemy soldiers. And he conveys that really well. He did it in a previous movie as well, a movie called The Steel Helmet, which you really got to see as well. But on the low budget of China Gate, the battle scenes, particularly one where there's a boat full of Viet Minh soldiers who have a machine gun, and they're shooting at the banks of the river where the team is. That's a really well-paced scene. Crazy low budget, but they really film it well, shoot it well, and logistically it is really well done. But the heart of the movie is this kind of love-hate relationship between Brock and Lucky. And Angie Dickinson's character is hard as nails in this. She's raising a kid by herself. She's doing what she needs to do to survive. She's kind of cynical, she's sexy, she's tough. And Brock, in a sense, is the weak character. He is the one who's carrying the racist baggage. He doesn't want a kid who looks Asian, so he deserted his wife and child. That gets an arc during the movie. But as the movie progresses, and we're kind of trying to focus on Gene Barry's character Brock, because traditional movie narratives of this type say that the hero is the guy who comes in to do the mission. But as the movie progresses, and it becomes increasingly obvious that Lucky is the protagonist of this movie. It's never stated by anybody. I haven't even seen it in any of the criticism that I've seen about this movie. But Lucky is the protagonist of this movie. And that is an interesting and really wonderful flip that Samuel Fuller does with it. It's something that doesn't happen in 1950s action cinema. It's a really honest, and it's the right decision. There's no two ways about it. It's not like it could be this, it could be that. Given the narrative that Sam Fuller sets up, it's exactly perfect that Lucky is the protagonist. This whole team relies on her using her job skills as a sex worker to help them through various situations. Makes it really an interesting film from a gender viewpoint and from a feminist viewpoint as well. The essay about Angie Dickinson's early career by Kat Ellinger in the imprint Blu-ray of China Gate is really worth having a look at. Like I said, Samuel Fuller was an outlier. He was his own man. He did movies his way. He made some really interesting films that didn't get a lot of love. Things like The Baron of Arizona, where Vincent Price plays a con man who almost takes over Arizona. based on a real story. There's another movie he did called Park Row, which is a love letter to journalism, which I'm really going to have to rewatch. I watched it years ago, but I really want to rewatch Park Row as well. Pick Up on South Street, fantastic film. Thelma Ritter as Mo, breaks your heart in that movie. House of Bamboo is set in post-war Tokyo, where the American military is still running things, the American government is still running things in Japan, with Robert Ryan and Robert Stack. Really great movie as well. But China Gate is one that isn't really that well known. For me, it's got a lot of meat on the bone, and I can't recommend this movie more highly. I really like it. I'm going to rewatch it, and now I can see it at a time where I've got the kind of knowledge and the experience of life, I suppose, to really appreciate what Sam Fuller was doing in this film. Having a YouTube channel with such an engaged and passionate subscriber base is great fun, but there's also a bit of admin involved. I've heard horror stories about people losing access to their online assets and accounts because of poor cybersecurity and by using pretty basic passwords. It's amazing that passwords like 123456 QWERTY and the names of local football teams are still around. People even use their own names as their passwords. They really do. I want to avoid that problem. I'd really rather spend my time talking about movies. That's why I'm happy that NordPass reached out to sponsor this video. NordPass offers a simple one-step solution for personal cybersecurity. It analyzes your password health, checking for weak passwords and passwords that are used on several different accounts. It lets you generate and store strong passwords. It securely stores your credit card details. And their data breach scanner lets you find out whether your passwords have been compromised by the companies you deal with. But my favourite part of it is Secure Notes. With Secure Notes on NordPass, I can save my Wi-Fi password, which I keep forgetting, in an encrypted vault. With Secure Notes, I've got it on my phone, I've got it on my desktop, I've got it wherever I need to have it, whenever I need to link a new device to my network. I can even make a quick secure note when I'm on the run and I think I have an idea for a video, and I don't have any other way of writing it down. Then when I get to where I'm going, I can access it either on my phone, my tablet, or my computer. NordPass have given me a really great deal to share with you. You can get 70% off a 2-year NordPass premium plan. Go to nordpass.com/TerryTalks or use the code TerryTalks at the checkout and get an additional 1 month for free. NordPass also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, and thank you to NordPass for supporting Terry Talks movies. Now, thematically similar to it, I've got another Sam Fuller movie from 1959, in black and white, set in Los Angeles, but it deals with the same issues of racism, and Sam Fuller was always an anti-racist. The conclusions he comes to about racism are never always on point from a modern viewpoint, but they're more on the side of the angels than they are anywhere else. Now, this one's a police procedural, it's a murder mystery, it's a love triangle, and it's also about race. Really fascinating film, and this one Indicator put out in the UK, region free, so if you're in America you can get this movie, and I recommend that you do. It stars Glenn Corbett, Victoria Shaw, who's an Australian actress from the same place I am, Sydney, and James Shigeta, and it is The Crimson Kimono. Written and directed again by Samuel Fuller. Really sensational at the start. We see a kind of sleazy red light district in Los Angeles. You see a strip club, you go into the strip club. You see a really enthusiastic stripper very much in the 1950s style, who turns it on while she's on stage and turns it off. She goes backstage, she talks to some people, heads back to her dressing room, and when she opens the door, somebody shoots at her. And she flees into the street wearing her burlesque scanties, fleeing in a busy weekend night street, right through the traffic where somebody shoots her, dead in the street. That's the start of the film. That's the first 5 minutes of the film. It's got that shocking start the same way that The Naked Kiss, a 1960s Sam Fuller movie, has. I should do Shock Corridor and The Naked Kiss in the future. The two cops are sent to investigate, a guy called Charlie and a guy called Joe. They're old Korean war buddies. They're now police detectives in Los Angeles. Joe gave Charlie a pint of his blood when Charlie was wounded during the war, and they were both in a MASH unit. And so they're literally blood brothers. So as the murder investigation starts and they start interviewing the people who were involved in it, they see a painting in the dressing room of the stripper, and they try to find the artist. The artist turns out to be a young art student called Chris, played by Victoria Shaw. And that's where the love triangle starts. Both Charlie and Joe fall in love with Chris as the investigation goes on. Charlie's a red-blooded American white boy. Joe is a Japanese American, a Nisei. And that's where the love triangle gets really interesting from a racial point of view. The investigation's aided by another artist they know, an older woman in her 40s maybe, called Mac, played wonderfully by Anna Lee. She's outrageous, she's theatrical, she's a drunkard, and she's a mural artist who paints murals in restaurants and, as she says, brothels. And she kind of loves Charlie.
Charles, dear boy, have a beer. Love does much, but bourbon does everything.
Now, not in a sexual way, but not in a motherly way either. She loves him in the same way that Mo loves Skip McCoy, the characters played by Thelma Ritter and Richard Widmark in Pick Up on South Street. They got that same kind of thing. One of the things that Fuller does really interestingly is there are, in some of his movies, there are older women who act not quite maternally, but act as a Jiminy Cricket, as a conscience to the protagonist in his movies. Mo does it for Skip, and the wonderful Mac does it for Charlie. Now, Anna Lee steals every scene she's in. She's theatrical, she's outrageous. She talks about her love life quite openly when Chris starts asking her whether she's ever fallen in love with somebody of a different race. And she's just over the top wonderful. And meanwhile, one of the things that Fuller does to ground this movie is you see Japanese American culture. You find out that Japantown in Los Angeles is right near police headquarters. You see a Buddhist temple. Both Charlie and Joe do kendo, Japanese bamboo sword fighting. Then they're going against each other in a tournament. So they're both grounded in Japanese culture to an extent. But as the love triangle kind of tightens in the way it spirals around itself, Joe starts questioning who he is. And there's an antagonism between him and Charlie that builds as both of them say that they love Chris. Now, the thing that Fuller avoids is seeing her as a trophy for one of them to win. This is as much about the love between Charlie and Joe as friends, as brothers. They even share an apartment, with a two-bedroom apartment with two en-suites. So they're as close as guys can be without it being a kind of sexual partnership. And that friendship and that love between them, that kind of brotherly love between them, is threatened by this love triangle. Meanwhile, they're investigating this murder, which increasingly becomes involved in parts of the Japanese American community. And they try to find out what's going on. They go to a bunch of different places. They go to a place that makes rice cakes. They go to a place that makes Japanese wigs. They travel through the culture of Japanese America in Los Angeles to investigate this murder. They also go to a war cemetery where the Nisei soldiers who died in World War II and in Korea are commemorated. So Fuller really kind of acknowledges that even though 15 years before Japan was the enemy and America did egregious things to the Nisei citizens, things are improving and there's a kind of rapport and a rapprochement between white America and Japanese America. Like the fact that Sam Fuller goes the distance and goes and acknowledges the culture. He's helped by the fact that 2 years before he made House of Bamboo in Tokyo. So he had an interest in Japanese culture already. And he had a friend or an acquaintance who was a Japanese American police officer in Los Angeles, and that's where he got the idea for the story. Now, the movie is sensationalized. The characters are all really well drawn, including Chris. Victoria Shaw, interesting actress. She actually made a movie in Australia in the late 1940s with Chips Rafferty called The Phantom Stockman, which has supernatural aspects to it. Somebody should release The Phantom Stockman on Blu-ray or DVD. I really want to see that movie again. Her original name was Jeanette Elphick, by the way, but she changed it when she went to Los Angeles. She did a few good movies, though, in the 1950s in America. Things like Edge of Eternity, which is a really good action film as well. But she's solid in this one. James Shigeta started out as a song and dance man in Honolulu. In fact, he had a career in the 1950s in Japan. And people said he was the Frank Sinatra of Japan. And then he came back to America. This was his first feature film. Glenn Corbett, this was his first feature film as well. He later went on to take over when George Maharis left Route 66. Did a whole bunch of things in the 60s. Jobbing actor, but didn't really get the career boost that he might have got. So it's both of the main guys. This is their first feature film. They're working for Samuel Fuller. And it works. The ensemble works really well. Fuller's dialogue's on point. The action and the story moves on at a fantastic pace. And they're actually, as one of the essays on this indicator Blu-ray says, there are actually 3 triangles in this movie, which makes it really interesting. I'm not going to spoil that for you, because it gets a bit complex if you haven't seen the movie, and it will be spoilers. The plot of this is so well grounded, and things in the past refer to things in the future. And as things change, and as one thing is experienced by people, it then influences how they then move on to the next step of their lives. And I'm being vague about that deliberately. But The Crimson Kimono is a solid film. It does have that interracial romance, and it handles it honestly and really well. And I like that. I like the fact that it doesn't become a punch-out between the two guys. It becomes something different. The way the antagonism between them plays out is not played out in a Western fisticuffs kind of way, and I like that a lot. And I like the way that the resolution of the love triangle doesn't sit comfortably. It's not just like happy ending, everything's over. It's changed relationships, and I think that's really an honest way of doing it. And Fuller does that really well in this. So that's the second one, The Crimson Kimono. You should see this movie. Rewatching it is fantastic. There are other Sam Fuller films I want to rewatch because I got reminded of them while I was watching this one. Things like Underworld USA and Shock Corridor and The Naked Kiss. Hell of a filmmaker. 2 really interesting movies, and rewatching them was a true joy for me. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. You can also support the channel by going to patreon.com/paleocinema. Weather report for today is it's getting colder and I don't like it. I don't know whose idea winter was, but it was a bad one. Anyway, look after yourselves. Watch some good Sam Fuller movies. Don't watch any bad Sam Fuller movies because there aren't any. And I'll catch you next time.